Hi, I want to welcome you guys. Thank you so much for being here. There is a new interest in gardening due to the pandemic and COVID. Last year it was one of the top hobbies in the United States, and that has continued into this year. This is one of my favorite seed companies, Baker Creek Seed Company, and last year they sold out of seeds, and this year they're having the best year ever. The oldest seed company in existence is Burpee, and since 1876 this is their best fiscal year. So this trend is not going away. Why do I think that is? I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I think people are thinking about sustainability. They're working from home now, they have more time. But two, food prices have gone up 16% already this year. So I think there is a concern that that will continue and that our supply chain disruptions are not over. So we saw the supply chain breakdown last year, and then we saw it happen again with Texas a little over a month ago, and so there's a renewed interest in being able to take care of your family. So I certainly want to give you the confidence that you can do this, whether you have a pot on your porch or whether you have, a big garden. You have the ability to grow food for your family. So I also wanted to just talk a little bit about gardening and the role it plays and why it's so important and why I'm so passionate about combining pollinator gardening with traditional vegetable gardening. If you look at Doug Ptolemies' work, who is he lives in Pennsylvania, but he's a professor in Delaware. Doug Ptolemies talks about that over 2 million acres every year are developed in the United States. Most of that is east of the Mississippi. A lot of people think nature's somewhere over there, but the reality is that nature's in our backyard, because over 85% of the land is privately owned in the United States. And so when we think about the plants that we're planting, we want to think about planting native plants. And why is that? Well, one, native plants have the ability to be sustainable because they're from here, they're grown here, they are adapted to our soil and our climate. They're a lot less likely to, if there's a drought or if there's a lot of rain, they're a lot less likely to die. They are more likely to make it, but they also play a key role in our native wildlife. So if you look at our plants, only 5% of our plants host 75% of our butterflies. So if you want to have butterflies and wildlife in your garden, there are insects that have evolved with our native plants. And so especially on the shoulder seasons, we're in early spring here in central Pennsylvania, you want to think about flowering plants that are going to support our native pollinators. So these are things that are out of my garden, things that are blooming currently. Some are native, some are not, but what they are an early source of food for the emerging pollinators. So as the air temperature warms up, our native bees can't fly until it's at least air temperature of 50 degrees. I'm starting to see them. They're emerging from underground, and we have over 400 native bees here in Pennsylvania. They are the heavy lifters when it comes to pollination. So if you had food today, I want you to thank a pollinator. 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you take is courtesy of a pollinator. So it's really, really important. As the insects decline, though, so does our food supply. So it's something to bring to mind to people that, we need to try to do what we can to help these native pollinators, and planting native plants and planting nectar-rich plants are really important. So what am I telling you to do? Am I telling you to go home and rip out every shrub in your yard or every tree that isn't native? I'm certainly not. You see in this mixture, there are tulips and ranunculus, definitely not from here. I'm a huge fan of peonies. I have my grandmother's in my yard. But we want to think about 70% of your yard being native plants. So that still allows you to grow the things that you might love or you have a affection to, like I do, because they were my grandmother's. But it also allows you to plant things that are going to be less maintenance, have less pests, because these plants have evolved with our local wildlife. What's the urgency here? So in Pennsylvania, we already have 800 native plants that are considered endangered or are threatened, and 150 have already disappeared entirely. Now, we do see that our zones are changing here in central Pennsylvania. We are 7A, so that's significantly warmer than it was 10 years ago. And I think I have a reasonable reason to explain that. But what we want to do is think about how we can be, if we're thinking about plants, there are a lot of plants that look a lot like things that would be traditional landscape plants that a landscaper would put in for the color and the show. But we also want to think about plants that can do double duty and be a food source for our insects. There's also a misperception that, once you plant something, it stays in your yard, and that's clearly not true. Seed can be dispersed by wind, like think about a dandelion, right? Seed can be dispersed by birds, so berries and seeds get travel because of birds. And so if you were to pull out of this neighborhood, there is an empty lot beside another big neighborhood, and it's full of what are called Callery or Bradford pears. Bradford pears were considered the best tree by landscapers because it did 4 seasons of interest. Unfortunately, what we also didn't realize is they're very, very invasive, and they crowd out our natives. So there are communities that are doing Callery pear trade-in programs right now, where if you cut your tree down, they'll give you one to replace it. Some of these invasive plants have special chemicals called allelopathic. It's called allelopathic, and what that means is that it prevents other plants from growing around it. So if we have these invasive plants and we don't get rid of them, they can actually crowd out those native plants. What's an exotic plant? I mean, certainly people love this time of year, like the beautiful Japanese maples, right? And if you look, Japan's weather is very similar to here, so a lot of the Japanese and Asian plants do really, really well. The problem is that not all exotics, though, are invasive, but they may attract pests that you do not want. So one of the ones that's a huge concern here in Pennsylvania, because we're number 5 in timber production, is the spotted lanternfly. So it is already here in Cumberland County, although it is not widespread yet. We are in the quarantine zone. And what that means is these things hop, and they're very, very destructive to our grape production. They're hard on what I would call woody plants. And we don't know what to do about it at this point. And they've come in, they think, in containers from Asia. Another one that has been devastating is the emerald ash borer. In this neighborhood alone, we've taken down about 50 emerald ash borers, but they think we've lost about 450,000 emerald ash trees due to this insect. And again, it was just accidentally brought in. So this is the problem with bringing in these exotic plants, is you don't know if it's harboring something that might have a very bad effect on our current plants. So what's a native? It's a really great question, and there's probably some debate about this because it's really a plant that's adapted to the geography, the hydrology, which means the water, and the climate of the region. And they weren't introduced by humans. Well, what's introduction? I mean, a lot of things were brought over by European settlers. We're going to go back in the woods today, and I'm going to show you a rose that was brought in to be used as cattle fences. So you had animals and livestock. You wanted to keep them on your property, you planted multiflora rose because they don't want to get into those briars. The problem is that not only is it really uncomfortable to walk back there, and I cut down a ton of it during COVID, but it will literally create like a hedge. And so we'll walk onto my neighbor's property where there's barberry, which is in every single lawn probably in this neighborhood. It's a very standard landscape plant, but nobody eats barberry. And the problem with that is they harbor ticks, and we're number 1 in Lyme disease. So if you've got barberries, you do need to remove them because they can be dangerous for your pets and for your family. So why don't we just ban all this stuff? I mean, why don't we just get rid of it? You guys are shocked. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home and dig. So what's banned in Pennsylvania? Sadly, not a lot. We have a list of, they recommend they don't sell, but we can go to any nursery here and I guarantee you they sell barberries. And so burning bush is another one. You're gonna see burning bush on my property. I actually absolutely love that plant, but there is a native that we can use to replace it. And so again, because my property is a large property, I can't afford to rip out every shrub here, but as they die, I am replacing them slowly with natives, okay? Butterfly bush, another one that's really, really loved, but is like, you know, if you were gonna feed your kids potato chips, it's potato chips to butterflies and so forth. And now when I drive down 83, I can see it growing along the median. It is literally super invasive. So, but those are three that I would guarantee are probably in your yard or probably in your neighborhood. So what are some other invasives we should be paying attention to right now? Japanese stilt grass. Japanese stilt grass is so bad, and Japanese knotweed specifically, is so bad in England that people won't buy houses where it's in the yard because it can crack your foundation. So it is extremely difficult to get rid of it. Oriental bittersweet is a vine that grows up and can strangle trees. Purple loosestrife usually comes along roadways and waterways. And then tree of heaven is the host plant for the spotted lanternfly, and it grows like a weed. I let one go over one summer just to see how fast it would grow, and it grew 5 feet from ground level in one summer. So what are some acceptable alternatives? So if you have a Bradford pear, what could you plant instead? Serviceberry. Serviceberry has not only fruit and pollen in the springtime, but it has berries in the fall, and it puts on a beautiful fall color. So it does everything that a Bradford pear or a Callery pear does, but it doesn't cause some of the invasive issues, and it's really, really good for our wildlife. And you can see, if you're a birder, it attracts a lot of birds. So we're going to be talking about that today, like what can you do to prevent or provide habitat for our native birds. So one you could think about instead of the burning bush, which is an aggressive invasive, is our high bush blueberries. So I know one of you were interested in blueberries. Blueberries, obviously you can eat them if you can get to them before the birds can. But they also are beautiful fall colors. So they do some of the similar things that we're asking some of these more invasive plants to do. So why are they important? I mean, obviously, yes, they've evolved, but they also provide a lot of fuel. So right now we have a lot of migratory birds coming through. You're gonna see that I've left seed heads standing in the garden. It may look ugly to someone else, but it's actually providing a very important function, which is feeding mama birds right now. They need a lot of fat. There's not a ton of caterpillars available because it's kind of cold right now. So they're looking for a way to keep themselves well fed to produce eggs. So seeds are a way to do that. And this is just some pictures of things that are in my garden in the summertime. So this is the beauty of planting these things, is that these are magnets for butterflies. So if you've got violets in your yard right now, don't pull them out, because that's the host plant for our spangled fritillaries. And then the monarchs are on their way. So right now they've been spotted in Oklahoma and in North Carolina, and we anticipate seeing them here in late May. So obviously everything we're doing in the garden right now is to anticipate their arrival. So we'll be talking about some of the host plants for them as well. So why should you incorporate some of these into your lawn and garden? Obviously, there is agricultural benefit of natives. So last year, Rutgers University did a study where they planted pollinator hedgerows, so wildflower and native flower patches beside our apple trees. And what they found is that our native bees are doing most of the pollination of those apple trees. It adds about $9 billion to our economy. So it's really important to help the farmers, and we are number 9 in agriculture in the country right now. So anything we can do to help the honeybees as well as our farmers by planting things such that they have then native bees visiting is a good thing. And so we also want to talk about like monoculture. We want to try to encourage people to plant things other than just one type of vegetable or one type of fruit, because we know that that helps feed the soil. We're going to be talking a lot about soil today. So native plants require less water, they require less maintenance, they require no chemicals, and no soil amendments. They were born to grow here. So you don't have to do a whole lot to change our soil to get them to do what they need to do.